Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zhiheng Li, and today I'm going to present to you my COTD final presentation about Shanghai metro system. So here is the table of contents. We're going to start with a recap of my previous COTD presentation and then move on to a brief discussion of the lessons learned for both the city of Shanghai and city of New York, and then the conclusions. So let's start with the recap. A brief introduction here about the sustainable transportation system, its main principles, as well as a few specs of Shanghai. These are no big deal, just move on. And here is the history of development of Shanghai in terms of urbanization and transportation. So the city's urbanization can actually be attributed to the insurge of foreign powers in the 18th and 19th century. And its transportation development, on the other hand, started with the trams, trolley lines, and trolley buses imported by the Britain. And these older forms of public transportation actually gave way to the modern buses and subways in late 20th century because of the former's annoying noises and large occupancy of road space. And then the mode innovation of Shanghai in terms of metro transit system, and city found its own way of improving its metro system by first improving the power source of its trains from like direct current to alternating current to improve its efficiency. And then the city moved on to domesticating the production of the trains and the subway lines. And finally, as the world did, to move on to automation. And then about the lessons learned for Shanghai. So here are a few virtues that can be recognized for the metro system in Shanghai. It has superb safety, efficiency, and affordability as shown on the right. It has this sophisticated safety checks, this barrier between the trains and the platforms, this modernized surveillance and management systems, as well as this table of affordable prices. But there are also problems recognized for the Shanghai's metro system. First is also one of its current priority is to properly train its faculties for the implementation of automation. Because empirically, we have this incident earlier this year where an elder lady was trapped at the door, a protective gate of the platform, and the train was an automated one. And the faculty failed to shut down the train's power as the first procedure of its rescue, as a result of which the train just moved on by itself and pulled the lady down to the track and killed her at the scene. And then there's a trade-off between the sophisticated safety check and the efficiency of the system, because during the rush hours, these checks can actually cause serious queuing up and the congestion in the stations. Finally, there's the need for frequent maintenance of the Shanghai metro system because of Shanghai's geological, soil texture, which is quite soft because it's located on a delta. And here is a list of comparisons about the features of Shanghai's metro system. First is its private and public partnership development, which means for the government to find private contractors to execute specific tasks and projects. And the pattern is actually quite common among East Asian cities such as Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And then is problem of automation, as I've mentioned in the previous slide. And then there's the system sources of profit. So Shanghai's metro, as well as cities all across China, they have like these various sources of profit, and amongst which the major ones include property leasing and management services, as well as real estate practices. And this is also commonly seen in Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And then there is Shanghai's own attempt to implement transit-oriented development, for which the city actually plays as a typical example as a metropolis in developing country. And then move on to applications to New York City. So New York City's MTA subway at present has these virtues as having this aggregated line platform setup, by which means for multiple lines to stop at the same platform to improve efficiency. I have this local and express trains on the popular lines, and it has its multimodal connections at places as the Penn Station, and finally it accommodates for pets. And here are a few things that might use some improvements for the MTA subway. First is, of course, the safety condition. It must stop people from falling onto the tracks of the trains. And then there's a problem with sanitation to reduce the garbage and littering on the tracks, as well as the whole station, and implement more restrooms maybe. And then there's the facilities, which usually needs tender care because like many subway lines of New York have been built for almost a century. And all these factors together affects significantly the punctuation or general efficiency of the metro system of New York, which I shall elaborate later. To analyze the applicability of these potential improvements, we must consider the following factors. First is a funding problem. So to raise more funds for these practices and improvements, the city can actually consider to have these private and public partnerships like that did in Chinese cities, and also to reduce the amount of fare evasions, as the current mode of profiting for the MTA subway actually relies heavily on fare revenue, as shown in pie chart below. And then there's a problem of labor allocation, because in comparison to Shanghai's metro system, which have only 8,600 employees, the MTA as a whole has over 70,000 employees. Now, I know that the MTA covers a wide range of services other than subways, like the buses, the Long Island Railroad, and also services on Staten Island. But that's not really enough to excuse the large gap between the figures of 8,600 and the 70,000. So there must be some systematic reforms necessary to, in terms of the duties of the employees or simply the work hours of them, to further reduce the expense in terms of, the salaries for the employees, and thus improve the efficiency of the whole system. And finally, there are necessary replacement for the old facilities, as well as the implementation of cameras, just to reduce the chances of, criminal activities. So in conclusion, we have such findings as the globe's, common recognition of the next step of their innovation or development of metro system, as have automation. This in respect of which the Asian and European, countries have the most strength as current. And then we have found such correlation between the major concerns of sustainable transportation, as how the efficiency of the whole system is determined by other factors, conditions combined, such as the sanitation, safety, and affordability, and also the condition of the facilities. And then there is the relationship found between the ridership and facility setups, because as compared to the aggregated platform and train setup in New York City, China actually have these separated platforms for each line, because China is simply unable to accommodate that much people to wait for different lines on the same platforms. And finally, it might be useful for New York City to adopt more modes of funding and profiting to raise enough funds for its necessary improvement. And we have, on the other hand, recommendations for Shanghai as to have multimodal connections as did in New York City, and maybe also have express trains between the popular stations. And then we might need some subsidies for low-income passengers as did in New York, because right now the city of Shanghai only has subsidies for the disabled. And finally, faculty trainings for automation, very much necessary for safe implementation of autonomous trains. And finally, we have recognized that there are aspects that the city of Shanghai has done well in terms of having a sustainable transport system, but there are also aspects that it can definitely do better, and which are the aspects of efficiency, accessibility, and safety. And that is all of my presentation. Thank you very much.